What's up, y'all? Welcome back to the channel. JDM brought violence back to the welterweight division this weekend with an amazing performance over one of the most durable and best wrestlers in the UFC in Belal Muhammad. Let's get into the breakdown on how he did it. So, let's go over Belal Muhammad's game plan first, because there's a lot of misconception. I'm seeing a lot of, Belal Muhammad just didn't shoot. He just didn't, and that's not true. People think that any Muslim wrestler is automatically Khabib. Khabib had a very different skill set and game plan from Belal Muhammad. Khabib was fine with failing takedowns if it meant he could get you backed up to the fence. Belal Muhammad, however, uses that same pressure boxing style like Khabib, but he's not the chain wrestler that Khabib is. What he likes to do is he likes to back people up to the fence, he likes to get them to commit to a high guard, and then he will lock his hands around a double or a body lock or even a single, and once his hands are locked, he has one of the best takedown finishes in the sport. However, if you can prevent that initial hands locking, he's going to look to return to striking and maybe clinch a little bit, but he's not super strong or has the greatest judo in the clinch. So to counter this, JDM initially kept the fight in space to just cut off the cage, take that factor out. Now, Belal Muhammad does have very good takedowns in space comparatively to some of the other wrestlers in the UFC. And it's a very difficult thing to do, to take someone down in space. But JDM has shown a vulnerability to this because of his high guard. Now, one of the coolest things that JDM was doing was he wasn't using the high guard defensively purely. Obviously, it's a defensive guard. But what he would do is anytime he would cross into boxing range, and that is, once you're in boxing range, you can shoot a pretty good double. He would enter boxing range with a single strike, sometimes multiple strikes, but for the defensive purposes of this fight and to get Belal Muhammad moving backwards, he would enter with a jab or a cross. And when he would jab, he would dip his head down, maintaining his high guard. And this does leave you vulnerable to kicks because you're dipping your head down and off center line. But one of the coolest things that JDM did was he wouldn't dip to a set spot. So it wasn't jab, dip to his right, pop back up. That becomes very predictable. He would jab, dip to his right, circle off to his left, circle off to his right, maintaining a low posture, and then pop back up. And it was just different combinations of this. Now, what this jab and dip effectively creates is it creates a down block, or a head block as some would call it. Effectively, you are putting your head in between you and your opponent, your hips and your opponent. If your opponent cannot lock his hands around your hips, it's going to be almost impossible for him to take you down in open space. Against the cage, you can start going for other things, but if you cannot get a good underhook or hands locked around the hips, it's very, very difficult to take someone down. So he would throw this jab, he would keep this high guard up, and Belal Muhammad would be looking for his takedown entries, but they just weren't there. And against JDM, it can be very consequential to just shoot a reckless takedown, as we saw in the Gilbert Burns fight. So another thing that JDM was doing early in the fight, which he went away from late, but I don't mind it, was the uppercut and knee feints. And I am in love with the uppercut feints against the wrestler because it's just something to think about. Every time you're thinking about closing the distance and you see that little uppercut in space, it's like he's not really throwing it, but he's letting you know it's there. It was phenomenal. But later in the fight, Belal Muhammad was able to back JDM up against the fence. And this is where you would think, okay, even with that high guard, if JDM can't back up off the shot, there's no sprawl, there's not much he can do from there. Belal should be able to enter and then chain a takedown, which he's not the best at, but he's certainly capable of. JDM, what he would do when he got backed up to the fence was he would switch to a much more head movement based defense. He would naturally start bringing his arms down, and his head movement in the fight was crazy. He was slipping off to his right, slipping off to his left, rolling, landing massive shots back. And a lot of those exchanges against the fence, upon first watch, I couldn't really tell how clean Belal was landing. And he did land a few good punches, but JDM was landing the way more consequential sorry, that word is tough, consequential shots. And he was also just moving with the shots. So Belal would throw a jab, he would move with the jab, he would slip outside the cross, and then he would rip him with a hook or an uppercut or multiple shots. JDM also used stance switching excellently. Now, stance switching, it's subtle, you don't really notice it, but what it does is it changes the angle on the takedown. So if you're in an open stance, that would be southpaw orthodox. The angle on the takedown for the double leg is much different than the closed stance. So JDM would leg kick, he would circle, and then he would switch stances. Every time there was a reset, Belal he knew, but he couldn't exactly tell what stance JDM was in and what the angle was for the takedown. Another thing that JDM did so well in this fight from the jump was pressure to counter. So he would be first and third. He would throw that jab, like I said, or he would throw a cross, and he would try to bait a shot out of Belal Muhammad, because Belal Muhammad is very reactionary. He doesn't like to get hit, and when he gets hit, he wants to get it back. So JDM would throw a stiff, long jab, and then he would move his head, and as Belal would come back, he would start to counter off that. And when they're countering off that, it makes it even harder to set up your takedown. JDM also used some really cool scrambling and sweeps. He used the knee lever sweep, which is one of the best sweeps when you're in chest-to-chest half guard, and it was an off balance. And a lot of the stuff he did was just making Belal move so that he could stand up. For example, right here, Belal goes for the takedown. He's got his hands locked. JDM feints the switch, which, if you don't know, he can, with that arm underneath the leg, if Belal doesn't address it, he'll be able to circle off and take Belal's back. Belal's a good wrestler, so he noticed the switch, and he lets go of his hands. As soon as Belal lets go of his hands, JDM just stands up. Another thing he did was he went for an inversion late in the 5th round. This was critical because, according to the judges, the score was 2-2 going into the 5th. I don't know how, but if Belal would have gotten some serious damage off, Belal could have won the fight. So he feints a Craig Jones-style inversion off of a Kimura trap. Now, Belal sits back on that leg thinking he's going to do damage. But when Belal sits back on that leg, JDM is effectively in the referee's position, and he gets up and batters him. Another thing I love so much about JDM is the way he mixes in the body work. Everyone talks about this, but I just have to highlight it as well. His combinations and the angles he takes, he'll throw the right, step off to the right, go body, back to the head. So beautiful. And Jack Della Maddalena showed that his pressure, fundamentals, his ability to adjust in the fight are top level in MMA. He is the champ. He will be taking on he will be taking on Islam Makhachev next, and I am so excited for that fight. Hopefully it gets announced later today with Dana White's Instagram, and if it does, expect a breakdown on that. Like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more breakdowns.